My name is Sarah Millar. I am from Diversity VC. I lead our US team for the International Nonprofit Organization. We are focused on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in venture capital. And the standard is one of those efforts that we launched about 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago in Europe. And today is the official launch of the standard in the US. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Laura McGee from Diversio, who's our partner in the standard, to take everybody through a brief synopsis of what exactly it includes and how it's applicable.
Thanks, Sarah. Delighted to be here today. Delighted to launch the standard in the US and Canada, so over here in North America. What I'd like to do, keep it super brief because I think the real meat is going to be in the discussion in the Q&A, is give a quick overview of what exactly is the standard for diversity in venture capital investment. And I think seeing is believing, so thought I would walk through a quick demo of the dashboard that participating funds ultimately receive, so you can see how the standard ultimately plays out. So let me share my screen here. Great. Maxie, maybe give me a nod if you can see my screen. Perfect. So at a very high level, the standard is effectively a certification as well as a community for venture capital firms that have made a real commitment to diversity and inclusion. And the genesis behind the standard and really how it came to be is through a partnership between Diversio, Diversity VC, and OneTech, where we effectively got together and said, there has got to be a way for venture capital firms to identify really best practices that are relevant to their fund, given their region, their thesis, and their size. And ultimately, create that community of shared learnings to help organizations both learn from each other, take those really critical next steps, and then equally important, signal to the community, so limited partners, founders, employees, and so on, that they really do mean it when they say they intend to become a diverse and inclusive place to work, but also capital manager. And so effectively how the standard works, it is a certification program. So it involves both an assessment process as well as, of course, recommendations and results. And at a very high level, there are 2 levels to the standard, which you can see on this screen. Each level comes with a baseline set of criteria, which are best practices that Diversio, OneTech, and Diversity VC identified through a really rigorous data assessment. The funds, participating funds, must have those baseline programs in place, as well as an optional set of programs from 4 different categories. And so this here is really the reflection of the equity and inclusion component of the standard. And so the way that we developed the program is it really looks at 4 separate buckets. So it looks at recruiting and HR and internal policy and culture, which are reflections of the venture capital firm's internal workforce. But it also looks at deal flow sources and portfolio guidance, which of course is how VC firms engage with their portfolio companies. And so the idea here is that firms have the option to implement programs that feel like they're the best fit with their culture, but they must really cover the gamut of these 4 categories and ultimately help them become both inclusive internally, but also with respect to making investments. So it's a super short assessment, about 90 minutes. It's guided by a Diversity VC or a Diversio representative who will not only walk through the different criteria, but will also take the opportunity to share knowledge, share learnings, and educate your fund on what it means to be diverse and inclusive. And ultimately, what participating funds get is their custom dashboard. And so ultimately, they're able to, of course, receive their certification if they qualify, but also really critical benchmarking data in terms of the programs and policies that they have in place by category relative to industry average. And so this industry score is specific to the size and the type of fund that is being assessed, because of course, big venture capital firms who are global look a little different than smaller, maybe one-man shops. And then I think most importantly is we're taking all of that data and all of those shared learnings and feeding that into a recommendation engine that will recommend ultimately programs and policies that are most likely to improve the inclusion within your workplace and within your investment practices. And so on your dashboard, you're able to create an action plan, access resources to really implement and stand up those recommendations, keep track firm-wide of your diversity and inclusion goals, and then see all of your programming in one place. And so the idea here is, really to give your firm a central location and place for best practice guidance, and then resources to help you ultimately really drive that change. I think what's not featured on the dashboard, but is becoming a really core piece of the standard, is creating that community, not only of like-minded venture capital firms, but also of partner organizations, community advocates, limited partners, and of course, founders and technology companies that really share that commitment. And so today's event is one example of ways that we can bring together participants to share learnings, but you can expect to see a lot more of that as we go forward. So maybe I'll stop there and hand it over to our lovely moderator.
Thank you so much, Laura. It is exciting to be here today. Welcome to everyone that's on Zoom today, joining us for the launch of Diversity VC's standard. Thank you to our partner, Diversio, for helping put this panel on today. I am so excited to be talking to the amazing folks on the call today. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, sorry. My name is Terell Sterling. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Go Paladin that supports underrepresented and underserved entrepreneurs to help them break into tech. We are so excited about the panel today, and let's go ahead and get started. So let me introduce our wonderful panel. Today we have Laura McGee, co-founder and CEO of Diversio. We have Jessica Peltz, co-founder of the Women in VC and founding partner at Hannah Gray. We also have Samar Youssef, Chief of Staff of Black VC. We have Sarah Millar, Head of North American Diversity VC and Principal at City Light Capital, as well as Anu Adebajo, who is D&I Committee of ILPA and Senior Investment Manager of British Patient Capital. Welcome to the panelists. Let's go ahead and get kicked off. Well, first, let's have everyone introduce themselves. Sorry, so let's have everyone introduce themselves and just tell people who you are. So let's start with Sarah.
Sure. Thanks, Terell. So my name is Sarah. As Terell said, I lead up the US team for Diversity VC, and it's good to see some of the UK and European team in the participants list here. I'm also a principal at City Light Capital. We're an early stage venture fund focused on impact investments. We have gone through the standard, and so can represent a couple of different viewpoints on the panel today.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. We're thrilled to be here. I'm Jessica Feltz. I'm the founding partner of Hannah Gray. We are a first check fund based in New York and Denver, investing in early stage founders that are reimagining everyday experiences to improve work and life. Separately, I also co-founded Women in VC back in 2015, which we've grown into the world's largest community for women investors, which now includes over 3,200 women across more than 2,000 venture firms in over 180 cities and 60 countries. So just proud to be that central infrastructure to help women around the world better connect, collaborate, and create opportunities for each other.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Samar.
Thanks, Terell. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Really excited to be on this panel. As Terell mentioned, I'm Samar Youssef, Chief of Staff at Black VC, a nonprofit organization focused on increasing the number of Black investors within venture, as well as advancing the careers of those currently in venture and being stewards of data on the Black venture ecosystem and Black tech more broadly. On the other hand, I'm also Managing Director of Investors of Color Network, which is a consortium of Black, Latinx, and Asian investors in the capital stack, kind of focused on increasing wealth within our communities through investing. So yeah, excited to be here and then to join this panel with these great panelists.
Perfect. Anu?
Hi, really excited to be here. So I am an investor with British Patient Capital. We are an LP investor into venture capital funds based in the UK. The funds we invest in have a significant UK element, but beyond that can be sector agnostic. I also am a member of the ILPA D&I committee, and ILPA is it stands for the Institutional Limited Partners Association. So that's an organization that has a collective of institutional LPs from all over the world. And we've been doing a lot of work on our D&I and have been doing that for some time. I'm also a member of a group called Black Venture Collective, which is a UK, and we have European members as well, group of Black and mixed race individuals in the venture community. And very similar to what Samo was saying, we are really here to see more Black individuals in venture, see more Black founders be invested in as well. And finally, I am also a venture fellow with a seed fund called The Fund, and that's just a really fun collective of mostly operators. Got The Fund in London is who I'm kind of closely associated with, but we also have some US funds as well. And yeah, it's just a really cool community of people who are on the side are investing as part of the fund.
Thank you so much, Anu. The many hats that we wear in this industry, right?
Yes.
And last but not least, Laura.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow all of those, but I'm Laura McGee. I'm the CEO of Diversio, one of the partners behind the standard. Our company, in addition to providing the technology that powers the standard, we are a data and software company. And so our business really is twofold. On the one hand, we have a software platform that helps organizations become more inclusive internally. And our second product is a portfolio assessment tool that helps investors analyze and engage with their portfolio companies to drive diversity and inclusion more broadly among that set.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and get kicked off. So I think the first important question is, why now? Why is it important to have a global standard in the venture capital community? And I kind of want to pose that to Jessica and Anu.
Anu, why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, sure. I think when I look at where we've come from in this journey of DE&I in venture, we very much started off thinking about how to even kind of sell the need for this to people within the ecosystem, and having to prove that it was the right thing to do, but also it made business sense. And I think that's been done now. We can universally say that's been done. I think that the next step for many people is to understand what good looks like. And we get asked that all the time as an LP. Constantly funds asking us, what should we be doing? What are other people doing? What are our peers doing? What does good look like? What is the benchmark? What's the standard? So I think that it's the right time, because those are the questions that are being asked. Fund managers want to know what they can do. They want to know what things they should be looking at. They want to know the areas that they can specifically work on and make changes. And so I think, yeah, it's absolutely the right time for the standard to help answer those questions. And what I like about it is it's kind of very specific. Sometimes you hear more generic responses to what you can do. You might just say, oh, we're really thinking about DE&I. We are we're partnering with organizations, but not specifics around what's going on. What I like is that the standard is very specific and outlines some specific areas that any GP can kind of pick up and do something about that result in tangible action, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And we like to think of things through the lens of like, what are the forcing functions that are making something like this relevant? Because this is long overdue. Like this should have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but I think the industry needed to be ready for it. And so we also look at it in terms of a why now of just a few major forcing functions. And one of those being just the data is available now. Like the data is more available, that diversity of thought, diversity just performs better. It's better for your wallet. So that's number one. Number two, being around the data around the founders and just the lack of funding that's still going to diverse founders, both women and people of color. So recognizing that for all the initiatives and talk about funding minority founders, the numbers aren't changing in a scalable way. So we do think that the research that we've done at Women in VC, that we need to focus on going upstream, and we need to focus on backing women and people of color managers. Because until we do that, until we really change the face of the people controlling the capital, it's not going to trickle downstream to those entrepreneurs and the products and services and goods that they're bringing to market. So just having that data and that awareness, we believe, is really important. Second of all is just the founders' values are reflective and shine through in these types of standards. And at the end of the day, as a fund manager, we're selling capital. We're middle money managers. And so you have to appeal to founders. And we genuinely believe that founders want to see this. They know that having diversity on their cap table is going to help them perform better. It's going to help them unlock interesting opportunities or interesting connections. And so we really believe that this is something that we need to do to be helpful and supportive and align with the values of founders in the coming decade. And third is just unfortunately, just more cultural urgency and awareness around this problem, which also we think is hitting a nice inflection point. So we're thrilled this moment has come, but I think that things needed to bubble up to be able to have the industry be ready for it.
Yeah, and I also just want to add to the kind of role of LPs, I think, in this too. I think, we've seen pressure from the LP community. I know Yale very publicly, for example, kind of put managers on notice and that they need to see diversity within their teams. And we're seeing that happen. And I think that's a really great driver. If you essentially, if you want our money, you've got to do something about this. But I think that's really important. But I also have seen some really great GPs not waiting for the LP pressure and deciding to do things themselves and deciding to, for example, find out the data from their underlying portfolio and publish it in their quarterly reports. And that's great. And that's without any, LP intervention. So I'm really seeing this kind of coming together of the LP community and the GP community, both pushing from their respective ends to try and accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Totally. And one just quick kind of fun fact that I'll add to that is when we published our research on women-led funds last fall, 38% of women-led funds are women of color. So it's phenomenal to see that this is not a pipeline problem. These women are there, they're phenomenal. They come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives, and we need to do better as a community to elevate them because, again, this is not a pipeline problem. So seeing that more women of color are starting their own venture shops, absolutely. It's talking to the LP community to make sure that they have awareness and they have that exposure because, again, it's good for business. And these are the types of businesses that should be getting funding in the coming decade.
What's very interesting about this conversation, though, is that it pivots back into this other point, right? There are great organizations like Women in VC, like Black VC, who are doing momentous things to change the conversation around DE&I. How does the diversity VC standard really tie into the work that y'all are doing, Samer and Jessica? Like, how does this really tie back to your work, and how do you find this is something that really appeals to your to the communities that you're working with? And we can start off, Samer, if you want to start off.
Sure, no, I appreciate it. It's a great question. I think kind of dovetailing on what Anu and Jessica mentioned, there's two sides of the ecosystem, right? There's the investors, there's the people that we want in these firms, whether they be women, people of color, folks from the LGBTQ community, and there's the firms, right? And like a lot of times there's a slower uptick, maybe there's a lot of interest around becoming more diverse, more inclusive, but a lot of times the process of doing that is very opaque. And ambiguous, and a diversity, the diversity VC standard, the part of the reason why we were attracted to it is that it kind of helps firms kind of understand what are relevant metrics to think about, as they want to become more inclusive, and what's a benchmark, right? Like, if you're $1 billion AUM versus 150, like what your internal policies, your deal flow, the ways you approach diversity, equity, and inclusion is completely different. So being able to benchmark yourself with firms at comparable levels kind of helps folks understand where they should strive to move. Because I think part of what we see at Black VC a lot, and I'm sure at Diversity VC and Women VC is similar, is firms approaching us thinking like, how can we become more diverse, right? It's like probably the most often heard annoying question that people kind of hear, because it's like, it's not just a silver bullet, right? It's kind of like meaningfully committing to doing the work, but there has to be some sort of path and process that we kind of point people towards, right? Like, here's where you start, and then once you know where your gaps are, you can more intentionally start to address those, right? And I think that's where organizations like Black VC, like Diversity VC, like Women VC, and others can like really add more value in being helping on that back end of like continuing to push them in a way that makes them more inclusive, that ultimately helps the entire ecosystem.
If I could maybe pile onto that, I think, and Sarah, please jump in. I think that's the reason that with this partnership, we really decided to build a platform, is we're quite thoughtful about building in the resources and the contacts and the information about these organizations and associations integrate directly into the recommendations. So I think that's something we're eager to keep doing as we intake more data from VCs, and as we come into contact with more of these organizations, really centralize all of that information and start to build a really dynamic, not only assessment process, but also, as I mentioned, a community, so that firms know that if they're certified under the standard, if they're part of that community, they will have access to, in as easy a way as possible to the sources that will help them diversify both internally and also their portfolios.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to tag on to, I think to Laura's point, like we are not going to have every single answer. I think that Black VC, Women in VC, VC Familia, like all of these organizations do incredible work. And there's no reason for us to kind of reinvent the wheel every single time. And so the more that we can lean on each other and have kind of a centralized point of information sharing and collaboration, the more effective this will be overall. I also want to turn the question to Terell, as well as the leader of an organization that works with diverse entrepreneurs. We've kind of heard the LP perspective and maybe the GP perspective, but how do you think about entrepreneurs' reactions to or value of something like the Diversity VC standard?
It's so funny that you bring that up, Sarah. I think that what we're seeing now is kind of piggybacking off of what Jessica said, is this is a no-brainer. I don't know how many more studies we have to spend millions and billions of dollars on to say, hey, does diversity pay? It's like, yeah, it does. And when you think of it from the entrepreneur's aspect, the entrepreneur knows that you have a team of diverse thought, diverse individuals. You are truly getting the best of every market, because you have people who know how to all sell, they know how to build to the communities that they represent and the affinities that they're attached to. So I find that the Diversity VC standard is something that we're going to start to see more and more startups attached to and align with, because it's part of their core, it's part of core competency. So I think it is important that we start to get more, bring this out and put it in front of our founders and in front of our portfolios, because we want them to understand that this is not a, after the thought. It's not an afterthought. You don't think about DE&I after you've raised your first round. You think about it when you're writing your first line of code. So I think it's great that we're having this conversation. And actually, I want to turn it back to Jessica. Jessica, as working with women in VC, how does this tie back to y'all's mission of empowering more women to break into VC, as well as just understand the DE&I aspect?
Totally, and I'll also ancillary it from both my hats, right? So through my firm at Hannah Gray, we have been thoughtful about diversity and inclusion in every aspect of our business. Like 45% of our LP base is women or people of color. 53% of our advisors are women or people of color. 65% of our track record is women or people. So like every single element that we can be thoughtful about, because we know diversity delivers returns, and we know it's what founders want. It's just it's not even a question. You shouldn't you shouldn't even need to think about it, but we know people do. From a women in VC perspective, we look at women in VC as kind of this universal umbrella to give women the resources to connect and also have the toolkit to feel educated, empowered about how to win in venture. And this is something that we obviously feel incredibly passionate about, because it's something that we believe shouldn't be a secret weapon that helps you connect better with founders. It's about how we can set them up to have a successful career in venture and have a successful firm and franchise for the coming decade. So something like this, we want to educate our members about this is available, this is why it's important, this is why it'll help you win deals. Again, because you always have to tie it back to like, how can you generate returns for your LPs, and how can you create connections and relationships with founders that are meaningful? And this just plays into that perfectly. And in terms of recruiting women with non-traditional backgrounds, I have a very non-traditional background getting into VC. I came from the customer side. I was at a media agency. So people ask me all the time, like, you didn't go to Stanford, you don't have an MBA, you didn't invest in banking, like, how'd you talk your way into venture? And so we also think that, celebrating these non-traditional career paths, which often women and people of color have getting into venture, and just elevating those stories, it creates more awareness and creates more role models, because you can't be what you can't see. And so that's one of the reasons why something like this is so important, is because we want to continue to show examples of success to help bring more people into the community, to help them understand this investing is a viable career path, and why their unique perspective on the world and their access to entrepreneurs and their friends and their coworkers and their roommates or whoever that are building companies, they absolutely belong here. And so something like this is just creating more of that comfort level of inclusivity that is just so important. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it's so interesting that you brought that up, right? Because you something that you pointed out is the non-traditional path into this industry.
Yeah.
We talk about the standards of where did you go before, which company did you go intern at, did you go to one of the big financial institutions? But then when you think about folks as they've broken into this industry from communities of color, from communities that don't really have that representation, you're talking about people who are fighting tooth and nail to break into an industry. And then once they're in there, they're figuring out ways to make it better and more inclusive. So I think that whole representation matters. You can't be what you can't see is so important. And then I really want to talk about the community aspect of Diversity VC. And Sarah, I know this is something that you've been working on over the past year here in the States. How do you feel that the community is really approaching the diversity VC standard?
Yeah, so I think, and I'll ask Laura to jump into this one as well, because I think she's been on a lot of the kind of pitch calls with us about the diversity VC standard. So I think that people are interested in seeing something that they can that is a guiding light for them. I think what we found when we were doing some of the initial research around why did we need a standard and what were funds doing currently, what became clear was everybody was kind of doing their own thing and didn't know what was best practice. And we may still not be at best practice. We may be at kind of good and getting better. But there was a kind of, not a lack of conversation, but a lack of collaboration with VC funds around what actually makes sense here and what should we do for something that fits our fund. Because I think something that every VC will tell you is every single one of our funds is a special snowflake and we have to do things our way. But there are definitely things that we can learn from each other and collaborate on. And so one of the best parts of the standard has been, I mean, when my fund was going through the assessment, the Diversio team was sharing, this is something that we saw with another fund that you can do to make this better in terms of your deal flow or your portfolio management or how you talk to LPs. And that's something that we're institutionalizing with the standard in terms of trying to start doing some more formalized information sharing and kind of best practice sharing. So, and we get a lot of that information as well from women in VC, from Black VC, from some of these other organizations that are really doing incredible work. And Diversity VC focuses on all different types of diversity, all different demographics. And so being able to pull in the expertise on the Black community, on the women community, on the LGBTQ community is really, really important and helpful for driving all of those missions forward. But I'll let Laura talk a little bit more about maybe how VCs have received the standard and how she's seen them using it potentially.
Yeah, so I think the response, I would say, has even surprised us in terms of how well received this effort has been. And I think, you know, everything from it was featured on the front page of PitchBook last week. We were featured in Bessemer's 2021 State of the Cloud report. A ton of great coverage in Europe. Of course, LPs, I think, are really attracted to the standard so that they can go out and have conversations, and it, you know, as a signal, it really means something. But I think for me, what really has stood out is how organic the traction has been with the VC community. And I think it's worth you know, noting or reinforcing, look, there are tons of drivers, there's tons of pressure on VCs, but ultimately I think the internal pressure is the strongest. And I think that's what's driving the adoption. And so I think one story, just to open the curtains a little bit, back when we launched the standard in the UK at London Tech Week, we had, you know, best laid plans all ready to go and launch in, I think, about the end of March. And as you can all imagine, March 2020 was not really the time to launch anything. And so we put a pause on the effort and said, look, let's let these firms kind of focus on COVID recovery and getting their portfolio companies through the wave. And ultimately, what caused us to move forward was we got all of the funds coming back to us by about spring and saying, look, what's going on with the standard? We're really eager to learn from others. We're really eager to share our data. We're really eager to collaborate. And of course, that momentum was only accelerated with the revival of Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And so I think, you know, the time is right. I think we have a very willing venture community, and we're excited to see how much further we can take it.
Can I just ask anew, how do you think ILPA and LPs can start to strongly encourage and recommend managers to adopt something like this? And what will make them have the urgency to do it from an LP perspective? Sorry, Terell, I'm jumping in. I was jumping in.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of kind of what LPs can do more generally, part of it is the fact that LPs are asking for something to be done. And as you know, kind of many people have already said, something can just be quite generic, and having a focused standard that walks you through what that something is and provides kind of clear steps, you know, options, comparisons to other funds, and really hold your hand through the process, I think is that's kind of the key here. So I think it's really more about the fact that, yeah, it's just something is needed, and LPs are asking for that something. And I think having a sole place, or, you know, sole places that funds can go to where they can kind of dive deeper into this, I think is really what the key is. So, you know, I think we have been, and many of our managers have already, or some of them actually already have adopted the standard. Others are going through the process as well. And I think really though, the driver seems to come from each other. So from, you know, the GPs recommending it to each other, because they all talk, and, you know, they all want to know kind of, well, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And they're sharing their experiences with each other. And that's what I found has driven them to go through the process more than really anything else that the LPs have done beyond the kind of more general pressure.
Yeah.
Well, to piggyback on that, and actually for the folks that are in the VC space, how do you feel with what happened last year with BLM, with Black Lives Matter, and we saw many funds come to the forefront and say, we want to support, we want to get involved somehow. Now that we are moving into the beginning of the George Floyd case here in the States, how do you find that people, and maybe this is more also targeted towards Laura, how do you find that VCs have been more receptive to the diversity VC standard versus in years past?
Yeah, you know what? I've got to say, it's so funny. The business case has been soundly made, but I think ultimately last summer made it personal for everybody. And I think in terms of winning hearts and minds, we had the minds, and now I think we're starting to win the hearts. And so, and I know that sounds kind of mushy, but ultimately you have people in extremely senior level roles saying, I feel an obligation when I go home and I talk to my kids and they say, I can't believe this is happening. What are you doing? You're in a position of influence. You know how kids talk. Kind of, what do I say to my kids about how we're making progress? So I think it's an absolute sea change. It's not going away. We're seeing other forms of racism, again, come to the fore. Just recently with the events in New York City and the video of an Asian woman being ruthlessly attacked. So I think that's not going away. So really, I think it's ours to lose at this point.
I think it also, based on, and I can speak from kind of the diversity VC's perspective, I think there was definitely an influx of interest in both the standard and diversity VC generally after last year. And I think that the impression that I got was a lot of funds wanted to move beyond the window dressing. And kind of actually, as Laura had said in the beginning, the diversity VC standard is not a pledge. You pay to go through the assessment. It's effectively an audit. Like, this is not a place where you can hide things or just, put your logo on a website and say, yes, we're committed to X. And so I think that more VCs are now willing to actually step up and take that accountability measure to themselves, because there hasn't really been anything out there prior to the standard that was, going and checking in that you're actually living the truth that you're speaking. And so by doing an annual assessment and actually having an outside party come and check that, I think that forces VCs to actually go beyond just, statements on their websites or things that sound nice in the moment.
Yeah, I would agree. And so I'm actually from Minnesota, which you only really hear when I say I'm from Minnesota. But so everything that happened last summer hit really close to home because I knew exactly where, all the riots were happening and things like that. And, I think for me, something that is still challenging is that I agree with Sarah that, there was a lot of interest and there's a lot of headlines and there's a lot of things earmarked and there's a lot of office hours happening, but write the check. And I think it's great to mentor and I think it's great to donate your time, but write the check. That's what's going to move the needle. And so I think that's why this accountability is increasingly important, because until you really do those audits and have that transparency, and again, this isn't just about focusing on founders, this is about focusing on funders also. That's really where there's more scalable impact. And so until we start to see that needle not inching, but making meaningful strides, you can't take your foot off the gas and you can't stop thinking about more scalable solutions to this problem. And so that's why, I agree, Sarah, that with your term window dressing, I think there was a lot of that last summer. I think we've seen a lot of that taper off. I think there's been a lot of people called out, but I mean, again, it's who's writing the checks? Because venture capital, we are the lightning rod for growth as an asset class for founders. It's not a pipeline problem. There are thousands of incredibly talented women and people of color entrepreneur building interesting, scalable businesses that are serving these overlooked audiences, and they need capital. And so there will be a pipeline problem at the Series B, at the growth stage, in the public markets, if we're not giving them that fuel and that juice in our asset class at the earliest stages. And so that's why these tools around accountability and measurement is so incredibly important, and recognizing that it is not just about a gender or an ethnicity sleeve fund or initiative or pledge. It is about thinking about scalable solutions holistically and going upstream to the manager level, because we've already seen the data that, at least on the women's side, which I would assume is pretty parallel on the person of color side, is that they're significantly more likely to back that type of CEO or that type of founder. And so it needs to be thought of in a holistic approach, both in terms of focusing on founders, but also focusing on funders upstream to better understand and empathize with not only the founders, but the customers and the markets that they're serving. So accountability and measurement all the way.
I would definitely agree with that. I think accountability is the name of the game. I think when, obviously what happened last year in the Black Lives Matter protests, I think, Black VC was elevated in that as a organization that's kind of been focused on the Black space for a while. And the approach that was immediately taken was like, how do you mobilize this kind of like this raw energy into things that are lasting, right? And like things that will actually meaningfully change the impact. So part of like what we started to do was like think about, like what is the life cycle, for example, of like the investor? At what points in a career journey does somebody make the transition into that investing, right? And starting to develop programs and make connections with firms at those specific inflection points, right? Maybe right out of undergrad, out of the MBA, senior executives and operators at tech companies, people that like generally kind of like removing any other, demographics, that's where people make the transitions, and how can we amplify it? But I think to Jessica, Sarah, and Laura's point, like, that it's, as you come up on the year, you're starting to see now like which initiatives, claims were more, kind of a response to as a PR push, and which were more legitimate. And I think part of what we're trying to do is continue to focus on the really tangible ways, to Jessica's points, like holistic solutions that are actually going to meaningfully move the space forward. So there is like, there's a lot of different, I think, elements, right, to changing the VC ecosystem, right? I think there's a diversity standard plays an important role, right? Like having that benchmark, having that assessment, having a way to say whether or not you're actually doing, you are being more inclusive or not. And I think there's other sides of the ecosystem, right? There's the deal flow question, right? How do you connect these really talented entrepreneurs that are solving problems in communities that, maybe majority firms are just not even looking at, right? How do you start to connect those founders and position them in a way so that like they are getting that pre-seed seed capital, so you don't have that pipeline problem at the B. And then there's the talent curation, right? Cultivation, and like ensuring that like, there's not necessarily, there is no pipeline problem from the perspective of talent, but there is an access problem, right? There's sometimes a language problem as far as like knowing exactly what to say and how to say it to effectively land those positions and succeed in the space, right? Because I think in the kind of like on the back end of that, it's not just about getting people into these firms, because you do see a lot of atrophy once people get in and they leave, right? When they don't find colleagues that like understand them, when they don't find the community around them. So I think, the role of organizations like those on this call is just to buttress the ecosystem at the different points, so that like, force the accountability, honestly, like kind of just like keep the pressure on, because I think the folks that are really interested in doing this will continue to be able to do this, but competing interests will always arise. Like a fund manager is always thinking about their fund economics, their returns, like how do they raise their next fund, and like ensuring that we're also thinking about those ways as we think about our interventions and our ways of supporting the ecosystem, so that it aligns in a way that's not kind of like counter to what they have to do on a day-to-day basis. Rather, it kind of just all goes in the same direction.
Totally. And if I could just quickly tack on to what Samra was saying about community, because I agree 100%. And that's something we think about with women in VC is like, yes, we need to recruit more women into the community, but we also need to keep the women we have in the community. And part of that is through being able to connect with like-minded individuals. So we actually have, within our broader organization, we have sub-communities for Black women in VC, for LGBTQ women in VC, for Latinas in VC, for South Asian women in VC. And so you have to be able to connect with intention these like-minded people that need the support, that need the infrastructure, and just want to connect with people that have shared experiences to make everyone stronger. And then obviously that spiders out into our broader network of resources and education and support. So 1000% agree with that.
So we're coming up onto the end of the panel, but there are some questions that popped up in the chat that I actually do want to pose in the questions about the diversity standard, and that's around transparency and public reporting. What is there built into the diversity standard transparency? Because everything happens in silos. We never really know what's happening. No one ever really reports how many people of color have you invested in, how many women have you invested in. So is this something that's part of the diversity VC standard? And I'll pose it to Sarah or Laura.
Happy to take that. And or Sarah, do you want to? I can take that. Maybe you can.
I'll go for it.
Awesome. So what I will say, and I think there's a couple of questions around, churn and leadership and things like that. What I'll say is we definitely see the standard as a living, evolving standard. So in V1, we are collecting a lot of that data from firms and using it to create benchmarks. We are not currently requiring firms to publish their results. That may change in the medium to long term, but I think at this point we're really encouraging folks to be open, transparent, collaborative, and so we're not. That was a design decision. Again, that may change in the future. I will say that the second level certification, level 2, does involve a portfolio assessment, which is a quite detailed assessment of how capital is allocated in your firm and what the composition of that portfolio looks like. Again, we're collecting the benchmarking data, not requiring firms to publish it, but we've already heard from several members that they will, of their own accord, they're looking forward to being transparent. Sarah, is there anything to add there?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think I've said in past discussions is we're, with the exception maybe of the companies that are in stealth, nobody actually, I guess, goes and does the work for this necessarily, but we're in an industry where we put all of our portfolio companies on our homepage. We brag by saying who we're associated with. And so if you're a founder that is considering taking capital from an investor and you go on their portfolio page and every single one of their founders looks the same, it's pretty transparent to begin with. And so, yes, there are ways for those funds to kind of share, especially the larger ones where the portfolios are hundreds and hundreds of companies, to share some of that data more openly. But I think that what the diversity VC standard is really trying to get at is what are the things that you can't find on that person's website or on their LinkedIn profile? This is, how do they manage their team? How do they manage their portfolio, which is typically information that you either have to have a direct conversation with that person to understand, or you have to basically be in their box or their Google Drive to see what all of their policies are. So it's an attempt to make that a little bit more transparent, whereas some of the more kind of portfolio facing or how they speak in the marketplace can be found elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. I want to thank just everyone on the panel for jumping on and being a part of this today. I did want to open it up to questions from the audience. I know we have some. There's a question in regards to from David. And how much of the shift is new entrants, vice changes by long-established fund families? The Bloomberg Gender Equality Index has some stuff you might look at. I know that a lot of the questions are wrapped around the fact that VC is a network and it's about connections. It's some of these pre-existing relationships that take place. How is the diversity standard helping to really uniformly help other folks get into it? Is it that sense of if the bigger funds do it, then maybe all the smaller funds will also do it because they want to be just as cool as the bigger funds? How do you feel that plays into really getting people to sign on to this standard?
So I think one thing about the standard that is a learning process for a lot of the funds that join on, and Laura can probably speak to some of the more specific experiences, but so through the standard, we make recommendations around how you should diversify your deal flow, how you should do better portfolio management, how you should provide anti-racism training to your team, to your portfolio teams. And I think part of the learning process from the VC's side of things is we are going to have to change some of the things that we do. And that's a difficult conversation for some people to have, but it's the same. Oh, it's not the same, but it's a similar conversation to be anti-racist. You have to change things that you're doing, and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's not going to be easy. And so some of the things that you have to do to meet the standard are going to change the way that your fund operates, we think, for the better. But that's, I think there have been some instances where a fund has come into the standard assessment and said, well, we don't really think that that this component of it is necessary, or like funds that we know aren't doing that. And the interesting part of the standards, we're able to point to the benchmark data and say, well, actually they are, and 75% of them are doing this. And so you're actually behind if you're not. And that kind of, to the point that if you were making earlier about like GPs sharing this and GPs kind of pushing each other, this is it's an interesting way for that information to finally be somewhat transparent and to force VCs to start taking those steps forward. So I think that it's shifting the way that some VCs are thinking about, are the things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis actually in line with what this stands for and what I stand for? And if not, how do I adjust to that?
Maybe one anecdote on that front. There were a couple of firms that participated that said, look, we want to focus on cleaning up our house to begin with. We want to start by getting our house in order, and then we'll think about how do we engage with portfolio companies. And they really pushed back and said, this requirement around diversifying our founder pipeline and this requirement around engaging with existing companies on D&I, like, you guys have taken it too far. Like, let's start, can you roll back the standard? And to Sarah's point, we were able to say, look, we have a sizable cohort and 80% of them have these programs in place. And it was a really quick mindset shift for that firm to say, oh shoot, we thought that this was obvious, that of course we have to start on the left foot and then step with the right foot, but oh, it looks like people can jump. Yeah.
I would also just say that, venture is going from what used to be a cottage industry to now a ridiculous amount of capital in the private market. I think the numbers is it's more than quadrupled in the past decade. And with that, there's a change, starting to be a changing in processes, because where you find entrepreneurs and what they look like is increasingly different. COVID is one big forcing function because they're not just in San Francisco. So you have to work harder to find entrepreneurs in different cities and in different locations. But with that is also a different type of entrepreneur, women and people of color, that are starting to come up. And you also have to dig deeper and expand your network to find those people. And so one thing that we do is we have an intake form on our website, because we don't believe in warm introductions. It's just not an elitist mentality that belongs at our firm. And we think more and more firms are going to continue to increasingly adopt something like that, where coupled with something like the diversity standard, we always look at it through the lens of, we want entrepreneurs to feel welcomed and feel like they belong at our firm, whether that's regardless of where they live, whether that's regardless of their gender and ethnicity. And so you have to be creating these tools and these environments to make entrepreneurs feel comfortable with you, because it's a long freaking ride to work with investors. And so you want to create that community and that culture of trust and inclusivity through every touch point they have with your firm. And I think something like the diversity standard, or things like intake forms where we literally it's a data collection tool, but we ask about gender and we ask about ethnicity, because we also then at the end of every month and the end of every quarter want to be able to look through our deal flow in a very data-driven way to say, you know what, we need to do better in this sector. We need to do better in this market. And so having that data is just going to allow us to see where our blind spots are, to be more thoughtful about partnerships and relationships we need to work harder on building to make sure we're seeing the best opportunities.
That's perfect. All right, it looks like we're coming up onto the hour. I just wanted to again thank you all for joining and being a part of this discussion. Congratulations to the Diversity VC and Diversio for hosting this event, bringing us all together for just time out, just to talk about how important this is. And we're so excited for what's going to take place in the next couple of months. And I just recommend that you all follow and connect with the panelists, follow their socials, and just be again, paying attention to what's happening as we continue to change the industry. And I will turn it back over to no one, Sarah? I don't know.
Sure, I can close it out. Thanks, Terell. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. As Terell said, you can learn more about the Standard, Women in VC, Black VC, Diversio, ILPA, whoever. You can just look some of us up. And if you're interested in learning more about the Standard, it's on the Diversity VC website. We're happy to chat with anyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining.